Hi, I'm Clifford, and today I'll be sharing something very terrifying. About maybe a year ago, I was scheduled to drive an Uber for this guy named Chad. It was maybe 1 in the morning and he had explained to me that he was coming home from a party. I was about 10 minutes away from his location, so I left at about 1:15 in order to be there by 1:30. When I pulled into the neighborhood he was in, I noticed that it was very bare, and there weren't very many houses. My minivan was the only thing lighting up the whole entire area. Even though the house situation was far and few, the houses were incredibly small, even smaller than normal trailer homes. It was a really sketchy neighborhood, and I didn't even know why anyone would host a party in one of these houses. It wasn't even like it could be outside because it was pouring rain. Every here and there I heard the faint crackling of thunder after a distant flash of lightning. I went a long way through that neighborhood. Actually, the majority of the drive was through the neighborhood, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. I eventually got to this long gravel road that cut off into some trees. I could see a dim light at the end of the road. I figured that was the destination. When I got to the house, it seemed like nobody was there except for one tiny upstairs room. It was dimly lit. I could see through the tiny window. I texted Chad, but couldn't believe that this is where the party was because there appeared to be almost no one there. What was also weird is that this house was rather large compared to all of the other ones in the vicinity. But sure enough, the light turned off in the house, and a man walked out the front door. I thought it was weird that he were turning off the lights since it wasn't their house, and he was coming home from a party. I started to get an uneasy feeling. As the guy walked out, another man followed. I figured it was maybe just his friend. They were both wearing hats with their heads facing down, and they were in all black clothes. They looked really sketchy and I was second guessing my offer to pick them up. I unlocked the car, and they both climbed to the very back of the minivan. This was odd considering that it was squishy back there, and all of the other seats were open. I asked him his destination, and he said, "Jeff, where we going?" His friend told me the address, and I typed it into my GPS. I was starting to get really confused because of the fact that his friend had to answer for him. I was getting really nervous and I kept checking in the mirror to see what they were doing. I could tell that they were whispering, and I got even more uncomfortable. Eventually I asked how the party was because the silence was putting an unsettling feeling in my stomach. Chad said he didn't know what I was talking about, and my heart dropped. I said, "Sorry, your name is Chad, correct?" I asked just to make sure I had the right person. He said yes, and I almost threw up in my mouth when his friend said, "Get him." Chad lunged out of his seat and wrapped his arms around my neck and for it. At the time we were on some road that on the left side has open fields but on the right was forest. He told me to pull over in a frightening, quiet and deep voice. I did so and he released from his grip. He got out of the car while his friend now sat right behind my seat. I was so scared and didn't know what to do. Chad, if that was even his real name, came and opened my door. He told me to get out and go into the woods. I did, and he walked with me into the blackness of the woods. His friend took my car and drove it off into the cornfield on the right of the road. His friend sat me down on some wet birch log. It was no longer raining, but you could still hear thunder crackling. He pulled out his knife and said, "Scream, and you'll die." Clearly I was going to die either way, so I just stayed quiet to make life last longer. He went over behind a tree and called someone. Every here and there he turned to make sure I was still there. Eventually he came back and told me that I needed to go with him. He walked me further into the woods and we reached a dark cabin. We went inside and he turned on a small light. Inside I could see that in the back corner, there was a person tied up in the back corner. I gasped at the sight of him being sat in a chair wrapped with packing tape. He had a gag, and he was making noise. Chad sat me down in a chair. He said he would be right back and left the cabin. I know I heard the door lock. I stood up and looked around. Nothing was there except the man in the corner was now either asleep or dead. He probably was starved. I walked over to the front door, pushed on the handle, and it swung right open. I walked outside cautiously, and began to run. Then, a severed arm was thrown at me from inside the house. I ran harder, and called the police when I arrived to safety. They searched the area and found the cabin, but what scares me the most is the fact that when they found it, it was empty and seems as though it had been vacant for years.